4 years the world stopped. 2 billion people tune in. Stadiums roar, flags wave, and one trophy gets lifted above a sea of confetti. It's the biggest, most unifying stage in sports. But behind that stage is one of the biggest corruption scandals in modern sports history. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is a story built on FBI files, federal indictments, sworn testimony, and years of investigative journalism. This is the dark side of FIFA. To understand how deep this goes, you first need to understand what FIFA actually is. The Fédération Internationale de Football Association governs 211 member nations, more countries than are even in the United Nations. It controls who gets to host the World Cup. It controls billion-dollar broadcasting contracts spanning almost every country on Earth. It controls sponsorship deals with global brands like Coca-Cola, Adidas, and Visa. And for most of its history, it operated with almost no outside oversight. FIFA is technically a private Swiss-based nonprofit organization, which meant that for decades it effectively policed itself. A small group of executives, sitting on what was called the Executive Committee, held the power to decide where hundreds of billions of dollars in economic activity would flow, which country would get the tourism boost, the infrastructure spending, the global spotlight. That much unchecked power, combined with that little transparency, was, in hindsight, only a matter of time before it broke. May 27, 2015, the Borolac Hotel in Zurich, one of the most exclusive hotels in Switzerland. FIFA officials were staying there ahead of a presidential election. At dawn, Swiss police, acting on a formal request from the United States Department of Justice, walked into the hotel and began arresting FIFA executives in their rooms. It happened just hours before voting was scheduled to begin. The images went around the world within minutes. Senior football officials being led out of a 5-star hotel by plainclothes police, some reportedly using bedsheets to cover their faces from photographers. The U.S. indictment, unsealed that same day, charged over a dozen FIFA officials and football marketing executives with racketeering, wire fraud, and money laundering. Prosecutors alleged a scheme spanning roughly 24 years, involving more than $150 million in bribes and kickbacks tied to media rights, marketing deals, and sponsorship contracts across South America, North America, and the Caribbean. Over the following months and years, additional officials were charged. Some pleaded guilty and cooperated with investigators. Some were extradited from South America to face trial in the United States. Some are still fighting extradition to this day. And then there was Sepp Blatter, FIFA's president for 17 years, arguably the most powerful man in world football for nearly 2 decades. Blatter wasn't charged criminally in the U.S. case, but FIFA's own independent ethics committee investigated him separately and banned him from all football-related activity, citing what it called a disloyal payment made to former UEFA president Michel Platini during Blatter's presidency. Platini was banned as well. Both men denied any wrongdoing and challenged the bans through the Court of Arbitration for Sport. But the man who had effectively run world football since 1998 was gone from the sport almost overnight. The scandal didn't stop at arrests and bans, though, because 5 years before the Zurich raid in 2010, FIFA's executive committee had made a decision that remains controversial to this day, awarding the 2022 World Cup to Qatar. At the time, Qatar had never once qualified for a World Cup. It had virtually no existing football infrastructure. Most of the stadiums didn't even exist yet. And the country regularly sees summer temperatures above 40 degrees Celsius, conditions considered genuinely dangerous for elite athletes, which is precisely why organizers eventually moved the tournament from its traditional summer slot to November. Multiple members of the FIFA Executive Committee who cast votes in that 2010 bidding process were later banned or formally investigated for corruption, some tied directly to allegations around this specific vote, others connected to separate, unrelated cases. Qatar has consistently and firmly denied that its winning bid involved any wrongdoing whatsoever. Then came the human cost, which arguably drew even more global attention than the bribery allegations. Human rights organizations, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, spent close to a decade documenting the conditions faced by the migrant workers who physically built Qatar's stadiums, roads, metro lines, and hotels. Workers who came largely from Nepal, India, Bangladesh, and Kenya, often recruited with promises of wages that didn't match reality once they arrived. Investigative reports detailed unpaid wages, confiscated passports preventing workers from leaving, and dangerous, sometimes fatal working conditions under the Gulf region's kafala sponsorship system, a legal structure that tied a migrant worker's immigration status directly to their employer, giving that employer enormous, largely unchecked control over the worker's life. The Guardian's multi-year investigation estimated thousands of migrant worker deaths in Qatar in the decade following the World Cup announcement, though it's important to note the precise number of deaths directly attributable to World Cup-related construction specifically has been disputed by Qatari officials and is genuinely difficult to verify with full accuracy. In response to sustained international pressure, Qatar introduced labor reforms, including officially abolishing key parts of the kafala system and introducing a minimum wage. Rights groups have acknowledged these reforms as real progress, while maintaining that enforcement on the ground has remained inconsistent. So, with all of this in mind, a natural question follows. Where does all of FIFA's money actually go? FIFA has reported billions of dollars in revenue tied to each four-year World Cup cycle, driven overwhelmingly by broadcasting rights and global marketing partnerships. FIFA maintains that a majority of that revenue gets redistributed back to its 211 member associations and reinvested into football development programs worldwide, particularly in smaller and developing football nations. But critics, including sports journalists, former FIFA officials themselves, and even some national football federations, have long questioned exactly how transparent that redistribution process really is. In many developing football nations, grassroots programs, youth academies, and basic facilities remain chronically underfunded, even as FIFA's own administrative costs, executive salaries, and bonus structures have drawn repeated scrutiny from watchdog groups. To be fair, this pattern isn't unique to FIFA. It shows up across a lot of large, low-oversight global institutions with concentrated decision-making power. But because football is, by a wide margin, the world's most popular sport, and because so much of FIFA's money flows through nations that can least afford financial mismanagement, the stakes here are simply higher than in most other industries. Since the 2015 arrests, FIFA has publicly and repeatedly said it has reformed. Gianni Infantino took over as president that same year and introduced a series of governance changes, term limits for top officials, age limits for executive committee members, and new financial disclosure requirements designed to increase accountability. FIFA also restructured its ethics processes, separating the investigatory and adjudicatory functions that had previously been criticized for lacking independence, and the organization says it has significantly increased financial transparency around World Cup revenue and spending. To FIFA's credit, some of these changes appear to be genuine and meaningful. Independent oversight committees were introduced where none previously existed. More officials have faced formal consequences in the years since 2015 than in FIFA's entire previous history combined. That's not nothing. Critics continue to point out that enforcement remains inconsistent across different regions, that FIFA still self-regulates far more than most billion-dollar global organizations would be permitted to, and that new corruption allegations, smaller in individual scale but very real, continue to surface regularly within regional football confederations across South America, Africa, and Asia. So has FIFA genuinely changed at a structural level? Or has it simply gotten more sophisticated at managing its public image while the underlying incentives remain largely the same? Honestly, that verdict is still being written and will likely keep being written for years to come. Every 4 years, we watch the best football players on the planet chase a trophy that means absolutely everything to them and to the countries cheering them on. That part of the story is real and it's beautiful, and no boardroom scandal changes what happens between the lines on match day. But it's worth remembering that the trophy those players chase sits inside an organization that, less than a decade ago, saw more than a dozen of its most senior officials indicted on federal corruption charges in the United States, and inside a World Cup system that, according to multiple credible human rights investigations, was built in part on the backs of migrant workers with almost no legal protection, some of whom never made it home. None of that takes away from what happens on the pitch. The game itself is still beautiful, but the business sitting behind it is, quite clearly, a very different story. If you want part 2, where we go scandal by scandal through FIFA's history and rank the biggest ones from bad to absolutely unbelievable, make sure to like this video and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.